Okay, this is several days after part 2, so this is part 3. As you can see, the gold PLA has shown up, and this body front part with all of the support material is about a 12-hour print. The back's about a 10 and a half hour print. And I have the unit connected up to the programming. This is the mini Maestro right here, all the servos plugged into it. The motor is installed for the pin walking, so you can see I talked before about the cam size is going to set the stroke, how far this peg goes in and out, but the location of this circular disc is the pivot point, and that's going to determine the stroke forward and backward, how big the step is basically. The little motor is mounted in there, fit perfectly, so the dimensions were good on the box. This device on top is just a MOSFET switch. The Mini Maestro, when not used in servo mode but used in output mode, can output about 20 milliamps or so, more than enough for running lights, for example the eyes on this robot, but it won't drive a motor. So, and in this case I actually wanted to reduce the voltage going to the motor. I have 6 volts from the 4 pen lights, which we'll look at in a second, and I wanted to crank that down closer to 3.5 volts. So I'm using some silicon diodes to drop the voltage, because a silicon diode has about a 0.7 to 0.8 voltage drop when it's passing voltage through it. So what else? Got the MOSFET is controlled by the Mini Maestro, so it isn't working hard. It just turns it on and off when I want it to walk. The let's see if we can get this where you can see what I'm seeing. So I've got the servos all mounted in place. You can see the 2mm shafts going out to the arm fixtures. The dial servo is located down there. All the extra wires are tucked in underneath there that I don't need. And in the end, the Maestro will tuck up here in the head. As you can see, the eye lights are actually on right now. And the sound chip is located over here, and I have it encoded with a bell ringing sound for when the crank is turning, and the mechanical dial sound when the dial is turning. Seeker's mounted in place. I did have to add an NPN emitter switch transistor to trigger it, so the Maestro can sends out a positive pulse when you told it to turn on, and the positive, well, it's not a pulse, I made it a pulse, a positive signal, and that of course saturates the transistor, which makes it emitter based ground, which turns the audio track on. Now, as far as the battery pack part goes, here's the switch on the bottom like we kind of talked about. I made a magnetic door cover, and there is the battery pack that I designed where all the positive ends can be up here, so the springs are down below for loading the batteries in place. Now, as far as the actual program for the Maestro, close in as much as we can. What you have to do when you're going to program something is you have to storyboard it. You have to know the routine of what you want. I mean, you can't program something if you haven't got a storyboard planned out. Now, kind of the problem in doing a true-to-life storyboard for this fantasy toy is that there weren't any crank telephones that actually had a rotary dial. Cranks preceded the rotary dials before they had some way of doing it, and the point was that all the phones on one given line were all connected together like a party line, but even the operator, and there was always a human operator, is connected to that line. So you would grab the crank on that big wooden box on the wall, and then you'd spin it around for 2-3 seconds, and your bell would be ringing, so you'd know your phone was working. But that also energized the entire phone line, and every phone that was connected to it would ring. All the other people, including the operator. And that single crank ring like that would tell the operator for her to pick up and then just speak onto the line, and if anyone else wanted to break in and listen, they could. It's kind of why it's called a party line. But you'd tell them who it was you wanted to connect with. Now, if it was somebody local on your same party line, the operator then would send out ring pulses for X number of times to ring. Like 2 rings would be such and such's house, and 3 rings, you know, pause in between each one would be such and such's house, and they'd send that out. And some people that got real good at the cranking could actually crank out their own codes and get their person if they wanted to have pick up, you know, no problem. And of course you never said anything on a party line that you didn't want everyone to know, because they'd all just pick it up for entertainment and listen in, and there's nothing you could do about it. And if your phone call was to some other place other than on your party line, then that operator would make that connection for you and come back and then let you talk once the connection was made. Okay, we've gotten way off track here. The point is, this toy, this fantasy toy, has both a dial and a crank, so I had to decide what to do with them. So I went ahead and just had the routine where the robot walks to begin with a swinging claw arm, stops walking, the crank on the side spins, you hear the bell sound, that stops. Then the rotary dial starts moving in both directions, and you hear the rotary dial sound, and then basically everything repeats. It stops and repeats back. And during all that, of course, they have the eyes flashing on and off at different rates and at different time periods to show all that. And in order to get all that programming, ended up doing a total of 27 frames. So each one of these frames, you can set the duration of that action. And of course, the frame itself corresponds to the settings here for the servos or for the on-offs. For example, this servo 0, as they call it, is crank. Servo 1 is claw. Servo 2 is dial. Then output 3 is walk. Output 4 is eye. And output 5 is audio. Everything is numbered 0 instead of starting at 1. Makes it kind of hard for those that like to start counting at 1. And the actual script, in case you like writing code and script instead of programming that way, is shown here in all of these lines. In this case, there's 29 lines because you have a start, a stop, and a repeat line. And so that's what it looks like. So what I'm waiting on now is I need some black filament to print the dial in black and the feet in black. And seems like I'm waiting for something else. Oh, I still need to print the detail parts that came out of the top of the head, you know, the phone holder and the cradle and all that kind of stuff. Got to print those parts in gold, then assemble the whole thing. So I think in the next video, with any sort of luck, we should have this thing, if not completely assembled, partially assembled. And again, the next video, even though it probably will appear as the next day to you guys, is probably gonna, well, I don't know when stuff will arrive. If the filament arrives today, then I'll start printing the black parts today. Meantime, I'll finish printing the parts for the phone set on top and all that, and get that knocked out. But there's the progress so far.